Mornings at my son's house always start the same way. I wake up at 5:30, an old habit I can never break. I dress quietly in the dark, trying not to creak a floorboard or closet door. My movements have been calibrated for years. It's been a long time ago. The key is to be useful and invisible. My room is at the end of the hallway. It used to be a guest room, but now, for the third year, it's mine. What do you mean, mine? Hayden reminds me every chance he gets that it's his house, bought with the money from the sale of mine. Mom, you do realize that your house would only be enough for a down payment, right? The rest is my mortgage. I nod and smile. I don't remind him that I gave him 80% of the money, not just for the down payment. Why? The truth will still be where it is, in the documents he signed and forgot and I kept. The kitchen is quiet and dark. I turn on the small lamp above the worktop. The light shouldn't disturb a sleeping house. I've learned to move like a shadow, become a master of silent existence. I take out the coffee grinder, wrap it in a kitchen towel to muffle the sound, and grind coffee for the whole family. Hayden likes it freshly ground, but he doesn't like to do it. His wife Taryn pretends the coffee in their house appears on its own, as do the clean shirts and fresh towels in the bathroom. By 6:30, the table is set. Scrambled eggs and bacon for Hayden, avocado toast for Taryn, cereal for the grandchildren, Macon and Elliot. I don't eat in the morning. Coffee is enough for me. At 7, the traffic starts. Hayden is the first one down, in his iron shirt and pants. Shakes his head, looking at the scrambled eggs. So much butter again, Mom? He says it with that special tone of voice that mixes frustration with fatigue, like you're explaining an obvious thing for the 100th time to an uncomprehending child. You know I need to watch my cholesterol. I apologize, even though I know there's exactly the right amount of butter, and that he only brings up cholesterol when he wants to blame me. In the evenings, he eats fried potatoes and steaks without remorse. Taryn shows up next door in a tracksuit, phone in hand, constantly checking and typing. She works as a purchasing specialist for a large retail chain and never seems to turn off. She walks past me like I'm a piece of furniture, takes her toast, thanks her husband for breakfast. It's part of the morning ritual, too, pretending that anyone in the house does everything but me. Where are the kids? Hayden asks, glancing at the clock. Elliot's on the computer again, Taryn answers, still on the phone. And Macon's still asleep. He doesn't have class until this afternoon. I go up to Elliot's apartment. I knock, but there's no answer. I open the door, and my grandson is sitting there with his headphones on, completely immersed in the game, 17 years old and no discipline. I touch his shoulder. He flinches and irritably rips off his headphones. What? Breakfast is ready, honey, and it's time for you to get ready for school. I'm not hungry. He puts his headphones back in place, completely ignoring the second part of my message. I stand in the doorway for a few more seconds, but for him, I no longer exist. I return to the kitchen. Elliot's not coming to breakfast, I inform my son. Hayden sighs but doesn't move. Let him go hungry, he said indifferently, picking up his bag for work. At his age, I wouldn't dare skip breakfast. Taryn and I have spoiled them. Taryn pretends not to hear. Hayden kisses her on the cheek and leaves the house. Taryn finishes her coffee and gets ready to leave too. Macon asked me to wake him up at 10, she says. And we're going to be late tonight because we're having a company event. You'll have dinner without us. I nod. I'm alone again, with an empty kitchen and dirty dishes. My invisibility becomes absolute when the front door closes. During the day, I do laundry, iron, cook dinner, and clean up. Macon wakes up closer to 11, ignores my attempts to feed him breakfast, grabs an apple, and leaves for class. Elliot gets home from school at 3, drops his backpack in the hallway, and locks himself in his room. I pick up the backpack, hang it on a hook, take a plate of sandwich and a glass of juice to my grandson's room. An hour later, I find the untouched food outside the door. I was once a court stenographer. 25 years of listening to and recording other people's stories, tragedies, victories, and defeats. I was an important part of the legal process. I was respected by judges and lawyers. My notes decided fates. Now I am a housekeeper without a paycheck, an invisible grandmother, a mother tolerated out of necessity. After Roger, my husband, died, I sold our house. I was 62, and Hayden insisted I couldn't live alone. Move in with us, Mom. Why do you need a whole house? We'll expand ours, make a room for you. You'll see your grandchildren every day. It sounded so tempting. My only son, his family, the opportunity to be close to my grandchildren. I said yes without hesitation. And for 3 years now, my life has been about serving a family that takes it for granted. By 6 o'clock, I'm setting the table. It's just me and the grandkids tonight. Elliot comes down reluctantly, constantly checking his phone. Macon is the last to arrive, his hair damp from the shower. Grandma, why is it stew again? Elliot wrinkles his nose in frustration. We had it last week. Your dad likes stew, I said, and it's healthier than the pizza you order when I'm not home. Macon grins, pouring himself a full plate. Leave it alone, Ba. Teenagers have their quirks. He's 3 years older than his brother and thinks he's awfully mature and condescending. Shut up, Elliot snapped back. You were whining about broccoli until last year. That's not true, Macon smiles. I've always loved vegetables, especially when my grandmother makes them. I know it's flattery. Macon wants me to check his literature essay again. He's a freshman in college and still hasn't learned how to use punctuation correctly. Grandma, would you look at my paper on Faulkner? And there it was, the predictable sequel. Of course, dear, I agreed, after dinner. Elliot snorts and continues to pick at his plate, occasionally glancing at his phone. What about you, Elliot? How are you doing in school? I ask, trying to engage him in conversation. Fine, he says. Mrs. Butt complained to your mom about your behavior in history class, I remind him. She's just an old grump who doesn't understand anything about the modern world. He sets his fork aside. Who cares if I learn the dates of the Civil War or not? I have the internet. It's not about dates, it's about understanding the processes, I say. History teaches us. Oh God, don't start, Elliot rolls his eyes. You're like a broken record. History this, history that. Who needs it? Your grandmother's right, Macon suddenly steps in. College is going to be tough without the basics. Who says I'm going to college? Elliot looks defiantly at his brother. Maybe I'll become a blogger or a professional gambler. They don't need stupid degrees. Yeah, sure, Macon grinned. And you're probably planning to live with your parents until you retire. At least I won't be living with my son in my old age and imposing on him, Elliot snapped, giving me a quick glance. There's silence in the room. I feel the color rush to my face. Macon looks embarrassed. Elliot, you're overreacting, he says quietly. Why? Elliot gets even more upset. It's the truth, isn't it? She sold her house, imposed herself on us, and now Dad has to support her. And she's always giving us advice, telling us how to live our lives, criticizing us. I'm not criticizing, I objected. I'm just taking care of you. And I didn't impose. Your dad asked me to move in. Yeah, right. And you've been eavesdropping on our conversations and telling your parents. Spying on me. That's not true. My voice trembles. I've never... Stop lying! Elliot jumps up from his chair. You told my mom about Josh's party. You're the reason they wouldn't let me in. Your mom asked me if I knew about the party? I explain. I can't lie to her. See? Elliot turns to his brother. She's ruining everything. She's sitting here pretending to be a poor old lady and all she does is meddle in our lives. Elliot, calm down, Macon frowned. Grandma doesn't deserve to be treated like this. Shut up, Elliot yells. You're her favorite because you let her poke around in your business, and I don't want that. We don't have room for you. He turns to me, eyes full of anger. Get out. There is a moment of absolute silence. Macon stares at his brother with his mouth open. Elliot seems shocked by his own words. And I'm suddenly strangely relieved, like someone has finally said out loud what's been hanging in the air all these years. I smile and look straight into my grandson's eyes. You shouldn't have done that to me, Elliot, I say calmly. I'm the only one in this house who really sees you. My words, spoken without anger, without resentment, just regret and a new kind of calm I'd never known before, seemed to overwhelm him more than if I'd yelled back. He blinks, opens his mouth, but finds no words. You think I'm an imposition on your family? I continue in the same steady voice. But the truth is, I was lured here. Your father wanted my money in a free au pair, and in return, I got a room the size of a closet and constant reproach. Grandma, Macon starts, but I raise my hand to stop him. No, dear, let your brother hear. Perhaps he should know that the money from the sale of my house went toward an addition to this one. The new kitchen your mother wanted, your car, Macon, and Elliot's gaming computer. I gave almost everything I had to this family. And you know what I got in return? The ability to be invisible in my own home. Elliot stands there unmoving. His anger has been replaced by confusion. But it's not going to be like this anymore, I finish, getting up from the table. Thank you, Elliot. You finally said what I've been wanting to hear for a long time. I walk out of the dining room, leaving my grandchildren in a daze. A plan is already maturing in my head. A plan that began to take shape a long time ago, but which I lacked the determination to carry out. Now I have it. The next morning, I woke up with an unusual sense of lightness. I got up at 5:30, but instead of going straight to the kitchen, I sat by the window and looked out at the dawn. The sky over Richland was slowly lightening, turning a pinkish hue. I couldn't remember the last time I just sat and watched the sunrise. Probably when Roger was alive, before I'd moved into this house, where I'd become a free servant. Elliot's words at dinner last night had been the last straw. But the truth was, I'd been thinking about leaving for a long time. All that was missing was the push, the determination to take the first step. Now it had been made. I pulled a small leather-bound notebook from under the mattress. Roger had given it to me for our 30th anniversary, the year before he died. Write your dreams in here, he said then. But instead of dreams, the book became a repository of practical information. Bills, passwords, contacts, notes, including information about the money I hadn't given Hayden. When I sold the house, my son insisted I transfer all the money to his account. It'll be easier to manage the finances that way, Mom. You know I know better. I agreed, but not with everything. $20,000 I put into a separate account that I didn't tell my son about. It wasn't that I didn't trust Hayden. It was just that my experience as a court stenographer had taught me one thing. Always have a backup plan. Too many stories I'd recorded about people who'd found themselves broke because of trust in loved ones. That money was my insurance, although not as solid as I would have liked. I could live on it for 6 months if I saved. Now it would be the basis for my new beginning. But before I acted, I had to think things through. I took out a blank sheet of paper and began to make a plan. The first item was housing. I needed to find an inexpensive apartment, preferably in a quiet neighborhood, close to public transportation. Ideally, with a first floor so I don't have to worry about stairs in the future when my knees get really bad. The second item is a job. At 65, it's not easy to find a job, but I could still type at 120 words a minute. Maybe some part-time office work or remote word processing. The third item is information gathering. In the 3 years I had lived in my son's house, I had learned a lot about his business. Hayden worked as a quality control inspector for a pharmaceutical company called Novomed. He didn't exactly hide the details of his job from me, who pays attention to an old mother sitting in the corner of the living room with her knitting while he discusses work matters on the phone. I learned that Hayden turned a blind eye to some irregularities in the production process in exchange for a thank you from his superiors. Nothing criminal, but serious enough to jeopardize his career if it got out. Especially since I had copies of some of the documents he'd carelessly left on the kitchen table and I'd scanned them with my phone out of stenographer's habit. I had no intention of blackmailing my son or ruining his career. But this information could serve as, insurance, in case he decided to make it harder for me to leave. With the plan finished, I went down to the kitchen and prepared breakfast for the family as usual. Taryn came down first, taking her avocado toast and coffee without looking at me. Hayden's not eating breakfast at home today, she tossed. He had an early meeting. I nodded, clearing away the extra plate. Taryn froze for a second, as if remembering something. By the way, Elliot was upset yesterday. Said you two had a fight. We didn't fight, I said calmly. He gave his opinion, and I gave mine. He says you were very harsh. Taryn finally looked at me, her eyes narrowing. You know, at his age, it's important for adults to be more patient. I felt a wave of indignation rising inside me, but I held it back. Elliot told me I had to get out of your house, I said in a flat voice. I was only explaining to him that my contribution to this house was greater than he realized. Taryn pressed her lips together. Winifred, we all appreciate your help, but please don't interfere with the children's upbringing. Hayden and I are doing fine on our own. She left the kitchen with those words, leaving me alone with the uneaten toast and the feeling that now I was definitely on the right track. After breakfast, I called Felicity Waugh, an old friend from my days at the courthouse. Felicity had been a bailiff, but had changed careers 5 years ago to become a realtor. We hadn't seen each other since I'd moved in with Hayden. Her son didn't encourage me to see my friends, always finding reasons why I should stay home. Winnie! Felicity's voice sounded as cheerful as ever. How many years? How many winters? How are you? Honestly, not so good, Fel, I replied. I need your help and your professional advice. Something wrong? There was a wary note in her voice. I want to move out of my son's house. I need to find an affordable apartment. There was a short pause. I understand, Felicity said at last. Let's meet. Today, I have a window between 2 and 3. Can you come to my office? I agreed, mentally calculating how to get out of the house without being seen. But then I reminded myself that I was a grown woman, not a teenager running away on a date. I don't have to account for my movements to my son. At 1:30, I left the house and headed for the bus stop. The trip took about 20 minutes. The real estate office was in a modern building in downtown Richland. Felicity met me in the lobby. She hadn't changed much over the years. The same bright red hair, though with a noticeable gray, the same lively brown eyes, the same freckles on her nose. We hugged, and I felt tears come to my eyes. I hadn't realized how much I missed the simple warmth of a human being. Come on, Felicity took my hand. I have coffee and cookies, and plenty of time for you to tell me everything. Her office was cozy and businesslike neat. We sat on a small sofa by the window overlooking the city park. I told her everything about moving in with Hayden, about gradually becoming a free maid, about yesterday's incident with Elliot. Damn it, Winnie, Felicity shook her head. Why did you put up with it for so long? Why didn't you call me sooner? I shrugged. At first, I thought things would get better. Then I got used to it, and then I was ashamed to admit that my own son was treating me like a burden. He should be ashamed, not you, Felicity said firmly. All right, let's take things one step at a time. How much money do you have? I said the amount. Felicity thoughtfully tapped her pen on the table. It won't be enough to buy, but it's enough to rent. I just have a few options. Small studio apartments in the Eastern District. It's quiet, lots of older people, good transportation, and the prices are reasonable. She turned the computer to her and started showing me pictures of apartments. Most of them were tiny but clean and neat. I picked 3 to look at. Would we be able to see them tomorrow? I asked. Sure. Felicity made notes in her day planner. What about the job? You mentioned you were looking for a part-time job. Yes, but I don't know where to start looking. There aren't many options at my age. Felicity's been thinking. You know, my sister works at a law firm called Burns and Associates. They sometimes hire people part-time to transcribe records. With your experience as a stenographer, that would be perfect. I felt a warmth of gratitude welling up inside of me. Do you really think they could hire me? I'm sure, Felicity smiled. I'll call my sister tonight. We talked for another hour. Felicity told me about her life, about her children, who had grown up and moved away, about her grandchildren, whom she sees once a month, but who are always happy to see her. How she found herself in a new profession after years in the courtroom. How's Tegan? I asked when the conversation turned to family. Are you in touch with her? Tegan was Hayden's younger sister, the one he'd had a falling out with years ago. I haven't seen her since she left to go to school in another state, almost 15 years ago. Yes, we cross paths sometimes, Felicity replied. She moved back to Richland 3 years ago after her divorce. She works at the Eastern District Library. In the Eastern District? I was surprised. Where are the apartments we were looking at? That's right, Felicity smiled. It's a small neighborhood, so you'll probably cross paths. I wondered. Tegan had always been closer to me than Hayden, though I'd never admitted it out loud. She was a sensitive, kind girl, much like her father. Unlike Hayden, who had always, for as long as I could remember, been calculating and thought of his own gain first. What happened between them? I asked. Why had they stopped talking? Felicity paused as if deciding whether to speak. You really don't know? I shook my head. Hayden never told me. All he said was that Tegan had betrayed the family. Felicity sighed. It's a long and unpleasant story, Winnie. Hayden made Tegan sign a waiver of her share of your husband's inheritance. Said it was best for the family that the money would go toward his children's education. Tegan was just starting college, 18, didn't know what she was doing. And when she did, it was too late. They had a fight, and Hayden banned her from your house. I felt the blood drain from my face. But, Roger left equal shares to both kids. I saw the will. Yes, but you were in such a state after his death that you trusted Hayden with all the legal matters, Felicity reminded him gently. He'd convinced Tegan to sign the papers while you were recovering. I closed my eyes. How could I have been so blind? So gullible? I need to see her, I said. I need to apologize. She doesn't blame you, Winnie. Felicity took my hand. She knows you weren't aware of it. It doesn't matter. I should have been more careful. I should have protected her. Felicity wrote down Tegan's address and phone number on a piece of paper. Give her a call. I'm sure she'll be glad to see you. When I got home, I went straight up to my room. I needed time to process everything I'd learned. Hayden had cheated not only me, but his sister, deprived her of her rightful inheritance. And all these years, I believed she had somehow betrayed the family. This revelation was a game changer. I now knew for sure that I could not trust my son, and that my exit plan had to be as secretive as possible. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Tegan's number. After the third ring, I heard her voice, so familiar though grown up. Hello? Tegan? It's Winifred. I hesitated, not knowing what to call myself. Winnie's mom. She sounded surprised, but not cold. Wasn't expecting that. I know, dear. I'm so sorry. I spoke to Felicity Waugh today, and she told me what happened between you and Hayden. There was a pause. I didn't want you to find out, Tegan said finally. You've been through enough since Dad died. I'm so sorry, I said again, tears welling up in my throat. I should have known. I should have suspected something. It's not your fault, Tegan said softly. Hayden's always had a way of convincing people, and he's your son. Naturally, you trusted him. Tegan, I'd like to see you, if that's okay. Of course, there's a warmth in her voice. I'd like that very much. When? Maybe tomorrow? I suggested tomorrow. I'll be in the Eastern District looking at apartments. Apartments? Tegan was surprised. You're moving. Yes, I said firmly. I'm leaving Hayden. Oh, Tegan paused. Then all the more reason for us to meet. I have a lot to tell you about your son. We agreed to meet at the little cafe near the library where Tegan worked. As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had lessened a little. I sat on my bed, staring out the window at the fading sunset, and thought about how Hayden wasn't the man I thought he was, and that the bond I'd been so afraid to break had actually long ago become a chain that bound me to him. It was time to break those chains. Meeting Tegan turned my world upside down. We sat in the small Morning Star Cafe for almost 3 hours. The conversation was awkward at first, too many years apart, too many unspoken words. But gradually the ice melted, and by the end of the meeting we were both crying and laughing like old times. Tegan told me everything she knew about Hayden's business. It turned out that my son was far less squeamish than I had thought. The inheritance story was just the tip of the iceberg. He'd been working at Novomed for the past 5 years, and using his position as a quality control inspector, had turned a blind eye to irregularities in exchange for bonuses from management. This isn't just negligence, Winnie's mom, Tegan said, lowering her voice even though there was no one else in the cafe but us. It's a direct violation of the law. They're making drugs with questionable quality raw materials. They're skimping on everything. And Hayden covers for them by signing false inspection reports. I nodded, remembering the documents I'd seen on my son's desk. A lot of things made sense now. How did you know about this? I asked. Tegan smiled sadly. My ex-husband Alan worked for the same company in sales. He told me about the schemes that were going on there. That's why we divorced. I couldn't stand to see him involved. After that meeting, I came home with a clear head and a firm resolve. The plan began to crystallize. The next day, I looked at the apartments Felicity had picked up. The third one was exactly what I was looking for. A small studio on the first floor of a quiet, three-story building. It was bright, with a large window overlooking a tiny but cozy courtyard with flowering bushes. The apartment had a small kitchen combined with the living room, a sleeping nook, and a neat bathroom. The rent was reasonable with my savings. I could afford to live there for at least 6 months, even if I didn't get a job right away. I'll take it, I said to Felicity, who had accompanied me to the viewing. Are you sure? Don't you want to look at other options? No, I shook my head. This one's perfect, and I love the neighborhood. We signed the lease the same day. Felicity arranged with the landlord for me to move in 2 weeks. I needed time to get ready and move my things. On the bus ride back home, I mentally made a list of things I needed to do. The first item was work. Felicity had already contacted her sister at the law firm, and I had an interview scheduled for the next day. The second item was the conversation with Hayden's coworker that Tegan had mentioned. And the third was to gradually distance myself from my son's family. I began to implement the last item immediately. When I got home, I didn't make dinner for the whole family as usual. Instead, I made myself a sandwich and retired to my room with a book. Around 7 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Grandma? It was Macon. You're not sick? No, dear, I answered without opening the door. I was just tired today. I thought I'd rest. What about dinner? He sounded a little confused. I'm sure your mom can handle it, I said calmly. You have plenty of food in the refrigerator. There was a pause. I could almost see Macon digesting the news. In the 3 years I'd lived in this house, I'd never once refused to cook. Okay, he finally said. Feel better. I smiled to myself. Get well. As if my refusal to be the family cook was a disease that needed to be treated. The next morning, I broke the routine again by not getting up at 5:30 to make breakfast for everyone. I woke up at 7 when the house was already buzzing with voices and footsteps. I went down to the kitchen around 8 when everyone but Macon had left. He was sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, engrossed in his phone. Good morning, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Macon pulled away from the screen and looked at me in surprise. Grandma, did you oversleep? No, I smiled. I just decided that from now on I would sleep in a little longer. At my age, a good rest is important. Macon looked confused. But who's going to make breakfast? I'm sure you're all quite capable of making toast and scrambled eggs, I said calmly. You're 20, Macon. It's time you learned to be on your own. He didn't know what to say and went back to his phone. I made myself some toast and jam and sat down at the table across from my grandson. Do you have classes today? I asked. Yes, at 11, he mumbled, not taking his eyes off the screen. Good. Then I can take my time. I have an interview at 10. That got his attention. An interview? Where? Burns and Associates. They're looking for someone to transcribe court records. With my experience as a stenographer, it's perfect. Macon looked like I told him I was going to the moon. Are you, looking for a job? Sure, I shrugged as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I'm 65, not 95. I'm quite employable. But, he frowned. Why? Daddy makes sure you have everything you need. I barely held back a bitter chuckle. The necessities, in Hayden's mind, were a tiny room and the right to cook, clean, and babysit for free. I want to be independent, Macon, I said. That's normal for a grown man. He shrugged, clearly not understanding my motives, but not wanting to go any further. After a few minutes, he left, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I finished my coffee, washed the dishes, and went upstairs to prepare for my interview. I was met at the law firm by Felicity's sister, Audra, a short, energetic woman in her 50s. The interview was quick and successful. My experience as a stenographer was exactly what they needed. I was hired on a part-time basis 3 days a week for 4 hours, with the possibility of working from home occasionally. The salary was modest, but combined with my savings, it was enough to live modestly. When can you start? Audra asked. In 2 weeks, I answered. I have personal business that needs to be completed. She nodded without further question, and we agreed to start work on the first Monday of the following month. As I left the office, I felt a surge of energy and confidence. For the first time in years, I was doing something for myself, building my life the way I wanted it, not my son. The next item on my plan was to talk to Hayden's coworker. Tegan gave me the name and contacts of Lawrence Merrick, one of the lab technicians at Novomed who was concerned about the violations but afraid to come forward publicly. I called him from a payphone, old-fashioned but reliable. The receiver was picked up after the third ring. I'm listening. The voice was wary. Mr. Merrick? My name is Winifred Crump. I'm Hayden Crump's mother. There was a pause. To what do I owe the honor? There was a note of tension in her voice. I need to talk to you. About New Med. About the violations my son is covering up. Another pause, longer. Not on the phone, he finally said. Meet me at the Green Lantern Cafe on Oak Street, tonight at 4 o'clock. I'll be wearing a blue jacket. He hung up without waiting for me to answer. I smiled. Clearly a man afraid of being bugged. In my practice as a stenographer, there were such people, paranoid people who saw conspiracies everywhere. But sometimes their fears were justified. The Green Lantern Cafe was not crowded at this hour. I recognized Lawrence Merrick at once, a nervous man of 45 in a blue jacket, sitting at a far table overlooking the exit. I walked over and sat across from him without waiting for an invitation. Mr. Merrick? He nodded, studying me with an attentive gaze. Are you really Hayden's mother? There was doubt in his voice. Prove it. I pulled a picture out of my purse of me and Hayden standing outside his house the day I moved in. Merrick looked at the picture and nodded. Good. What do you want to know? Anything you can tell me about the irregularities at Novomed? And my son's role in it? Merrick looked around nervously. Why are you interested? Let's just say I have a personal beef with my son. I didn't go into detail. And I want to know what I'm dealing with. He paused for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust me. Then he leaned closer. Your son is a key link in the scheme, he said quietly. As a quality control inspector, he's supposed to make sure all the standards are met. But instead, he's signing fake reports. He gets bonuses for it, gifts from the management. Meanwhile, the company uses raw materials of dubious quality, violates the technological process, all for the sake of saving money. How dangerous is that? I asked. For consumers, I mean. Merrick shrugged. So far, there have been no serious consequences, but it's a matter of time. Sooner or later, someone will get hurt, and then heads will roll, including your son's. Do you have proof? He looked around again. I have some documents, but I can't operate in the open. I have a family, a mortgage. I understand, I nodded. You don't want to take the risk. It's not just the risk. He looked genuinely concerned. If I acted as the only informant, they'd easily disavow me. They'll say I'm a vindictive employee who was fired for incompetence. I need something more substantial. I've been thinking. I had copies of some of Hayden's documents, but I wasn't sure they were enough. I had to be more subtle. What if, I started slowly, someone made an anonymous request to the regulatory agencies, just to get them to start checking, and you and other concerned employees could provide information to the official investigation? Merrick pondered the idea. It could work, he finally said, as long as the request is specific, pointing out certain irregularities that can be checked. I can organize that, I said confidently, but I need details, specific violations, dates, party numbers. He hesitated. I can't give you the documents right now, it's too risky. Of course. I pulled a blank envelope out of my purse and handed it to him. Here's my new address. I wrote down the address of the apartment I'd just rented. I'll be moving there in 2 weeks. If you decide to help, send the information in the mail. No names, no return addresses. Merrick took the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. I'll think about it, he said. But no promises. We parted 15 minutes later. I was sure he would contact me. In his eyes, I saw the same desire for justice that I had once seen in the mirror when I worked at the courthouse. When I got home, I found that Taryn and Hayden were already there, and the atmosphere was tense. Elliot had been reprimanded at school again, and his parents were discussing how to deal with it. Ah, Mom, Hayden spotted me as I walked past the living room. Where have you been all day? Meeting a friend, I answered calmly. Felicity Woe, remember her? We worked at the courthouse together. Yeah, I remember. Hayden frowned. But didn't you have plans to make dinner? Taryn and I thought it would be ready when we got here. I smiled. I'm sorry, darling. I didn't realize you were counting on me so much. After all, this is your house, not mine. I'm just a guest. Hayden and Taryn exchanged glances. Mom, you're not a guest, Hayden started, but I interrupted him. Anyway, I'm a little tired today. I think you can handle dinner on your own. I think I'm going to get some rest. And I went to my room, leaving them confused. That was just the beginning of my plan to distance myself. Over the next few days, I continued to shirk my usual duties. No cooking, no cleaning, no babysitting Elliot when my parents asked. Every time I found polite but firm excuses, tired, not feeling well, already arranged to meet a friend. Hayden started to show signs of irritation but tried to hold back. Apparently, he still remembered the money I'd invested in his house and didn't want to ruin the relationship permanently. Taryn was less restrained. I'd heard her complain to her husband several times about my strange behavior. I think it's age, she said, or resentment toward Elliot. Maybe I should take her to a doctor. The thought that my desire for independence could only be explained by senile dementia made me smile sadly. But I didn't mind. Let them think what they wanted, as long as they didn't interfere with my plans. A week after our conversation, Merrick kept his word. In Felicity's mailbox, I'd given that address for fear that Hayden might check my mail. I found an envelope with no return address. Inside were copies of documents with Merrick's notes, dates of falsified inspections, lot numbers of the offending drugs, names of those responsible. Hayden's name appeared in almost every episode. I studied the documents carefully, taking notes. Then I drafted an anonymous letter to the FDA citing specific violations. I sent it from a post office in another part of town so as not to leave a trace. Now, all that was left to do was wait. 2 days before the planned move, I decided to get acquainted with my future neighbors. Felicity advised me to be more social. I would need friends and support in my new neighborhood. I went to my new home to spend a few hours there, get used to the space, maybe meet some of the residents. The apartment was empty and humming, but full of sunlight. I was sitting on the windowsill with a cup of tea I'd brought with me in a thermos, looking out into the courtyard when I noticed an older man trimming rose bushes. He was tall with a neat gray beard and thin-rimmed glasses. He looked to be in his 70s, but he moved with ease and confidence. I decided that this was a good moment to get acquainted, so I went out into the courtyard. Hello, I said. I'm Winifred Crump, the new resident of apartment 1. I'm moving in 2 days. The man turned and smiled, openly and friendly. Corbin Pennell. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Apartment 5, second floor. Welcome to our little world, Winifred. His handshake was firm and warm. I felt myself blush like a schoolgirl. Thank you. It seems very cozy here. It is. Corbin nodded. It's a quiet house, mostly older people or young professionals who work all day. No noisy parties or family scandals. Sounds perfect, I said sincerely. Do you live alone? He asked, turning back to the roses. Yes, I watched his confident movements. How long have you been here? Almost 10 years, Corbin answered. Since I retired, I was a school teacher teaching history. Oh, I perked up. I've always loved history. My grandson, though, thinks it's useless. Grandchildren, Corbin grinned. I have 3 of them, and all of them are sure they know more about life than old man grandfather. But that will pass. In about 10 years, they'll realize we're not the dinosaurs they think we are. We got to talking. Corbin turned out to be an interesting conversationalist. Well-read, with a good sense of humor, without the condescension that often appears in men his age when talking to women. He told me about the house, about the neighbors, about the nearest stores and cafes. I listened, enjoying the simple human companionship that had been sorely lacking in recent years. If you need help moving, let me know, Corbin said when I was about to leave. I'm still a tough old man. Thanks, I smiled. But I don't have much stuff. I think I can manage on my own. Still, he pulled a tattered business card out of his pocket. Here's my number, call me anytime. I took the card, feeling a little nervous. I liked Corbin, maybe even more than just as a neighbor. And I think I made a good impression on him, too. As I walked back home, I thought about how my new life might be much more interesting and colorful than I'd expected, and that the quiet steps I'm taking now are leading me not just to independence from my son, but to a new beginning full of possibilities. The first signs of trouble at Hayden's work came a week after I moved in. I had already settled into my new apartment, arranged the few belongings I had secretly moved with the help of Felicity and her car. No one in my son's family had noticed the disappearance of my books, winter clothes, and a few boxes of personal belongings, proof of how invisible I had become in their home. I felt free and energized in my new place. Working at the law firm was exactly what I needed, not too stressful, but requiring focus and professional skills. Audra was happy with my work, and I was happy with the extra income, which, though modest, gave me confidence in my future. I didn't tell Hayden about the new apartment or the job. I just left the house more often, citing meetings with girlfriends or trips to the library. My son was too preoccupied with his own problems to notice the change in my routine, and his problems had really started. That night, when I got home after a day at the firm, Hayden was sitting in the kitchen with a bottle of whiskey, which was unusual for him. He usually only drank on weekends and rarely hard liquor. Everything okay, son? I asked, pretending not to know. Hayden looked up at me, his eyes cloudy. The company's been audited, he said hoarsely. The goddamn FDA. Somebody ratted them out about the alleged violations. Oh? I tried to make my voice sound only mildly interested. And there are violations? Of course not! He slammed his fist on the table. It's the competition. They want to set us up. I nodded silently, neither sympathetic nor judgmental. Hayden took another sip straight from the bottle. If the audit drags on, the company could lose money, he continued. And I could be made a scapegoat. Why you? I sat across from him, watching his reaction carefully. Because I'm in charge of quality control. He ran his hand over his face. If they find something wrong, they'll blame me. But if there's nothing wrong, like you say, then you have nothing to worry about, I said. Hayden gave me a sharp look as if trying to see if I knew more than I was saying, but I kept my expression steady. Yes, of course, he said finally. I'll be fine, just nerves. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house grew more and more tense. Hayden returned late, irritable and twitchy. Taryn walked around with a stone face, clearly worried about possible problems. Even Macon and Elliot were quiet, sensing that there was something wrong with the family. I continued to pretend nothing was going on. Cooked dinners now that my departure was imminent, I decided to go back to my usual routine so as not to arouse suspicion. I asked about school and college, inquired about Taryn's work, and at the same time, I was finalizing the last preparations for the breakup. One important step was closing the joint bank account that Hayden had opened for us when I moved in with him. My modest pension had gone into that account, and it was the same account from which Hayden periodically withdrew money for family needs. I'd never minded after all. I was living in his house. But now I needed complete control over my finances. I opened a new account at a different bank and transferred the balance of the joint account there. It was a small amount, about $3,000, but it was my money, earned over the years as a stenographer. 2 days later, I got a call from Hayden. Mom, his voice sounded strained. Did you close our joint account? Yes, I answered calmly. I decided I was more comfortable managing my finances on my own. But, he hesitated. Why now, and why didn't you warn me? Should you have? I let a little irony slip into my voice. It's my money, Hayden. My pension. Of course, he agreed quickly. It's just sudden, and a little inconvenient. I was just about to withdraw some money for a bathroom remodel. That's it. He was planning to use my money for his own purposes without asking permission, like he'd done so many times before. I'm sorry, I said without a trace of regret in my voice. But I'm sure you and Taryn can work it out. You both have good salaries. He mumbled something and hung up. I smiled. Another thread broken. By Friday night, the tension in the house had peaked. Hayden came home from work earlier than usual. grim and agitated. He immediately locked himself in his office with a bottle of whiskey. Taryn arrived next, eyes red with tears. She threw her bag on the couch and walked silently into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "Is everything all right?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "No." Taryn poured herself some wine, something she didn't usually do on weekdays. "Hayden was in serious trouble at work. They found irregularities in the company, and he's been suspended while they investigate." "Oh my God," I faked surprise. "That's terrible. But, I thought he said there were no irregularities?" Taryn gave me an annoyed look. "Of course he didn't. It's all a setup. Someone wants to set him up." I remained silent as I continued chopping vegetables for the salad. Taryn took a big sip of wine. "If he gets fired, we'll have to tighten our belts," she said. "Maybe even sell the house." "I'm sure it won't come to that." I tried to keep my voice soothing, even though I was cheering inside. "Hayden's a smart boy. He'll find a way." "A boy?" Taryn grinned. "He's 50, Winifred. He hasn't been a boy for a long time. A son is always a child to a mother," I smiled. "Even when he's 50 and has grown children of his own." Taryn shook her head and left the kitchen, leaving me alone. I finished the preparations and called everyone to the table. Dinner passed in an oppressive silence. Hayden was sullenly picking at his plate. Taryn was fidgeting with her napkin. Macon and Elliot were exchanging wary glances, clearly sensing something serious was going on. "So," I said finally, when the silence became unbearable, "I hear you're having trouble at work, Hayden." My son gave me an annoyed look. "Taryn told you." "Yes." I calmly cut off a piece of chicken. "She mentioned that you'd been suspended for some kind of infraction." "Which you weren't." Hayden raised his voice. "This is all a setup." "Sure," I nodded. "But, in my practice as a stenographer, I've seen a lot of cases where people claimed the same thing, and often it turned out that there was a violation after all." Hayden froze with his fork in his hand. "What are you saying?" "Nothing much," I shrugged. "Just thinking out loud." "Mom," his voice got low and threatening. "Do you know something about this?" I held his gaze. "Do I know something about wrongdoing in your company?" "No, how? It's not like I work at New Med." "But you know something," he insisted. "I could see it in your face." I set the instruments aside and blotted my lips with a napkin. The moment had come. I could feel it with my whole being. Hayden," I began calmly, "I do know some things. For instance, I know that you tricked your sister into giving up her father's inheritance." There was dead silence in the room. Taryn froze with a glass of wine halfway to her mouth. Macon and Elliot looked from my father to me, clearly not understanding what he was talking about. "What the hell?" Hayden tried to grin, but it came out nervous. "You're having senile fantasies, Mom." "I'm 65, not 95, I smiled. "And there's nothing wrong with my memory. I met Tegan. She told me everything." "You met Aunt Tegan?" Macon intervened. "But Dad said that she betrayed the family?" I interrupted my grandson. "That's a lie. The only person who betrayed the family is sitting at the head of this table." Hayden turned pale, then red with rage. "Enough!" He slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes bounce. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said calmly. "Just like I know that you used my money from the sale of the house not only for repairs, but also for your own personal needs. Just as I know about your machinations at Novomed." "What?" Taryn stared at her husband in shock. "Hayden, what is she talking about?" "She's delusional." Hayden jumped up from his chair. "She's an old, out-of-her-mind woman." "I was talking to Lawrence Merrick," I continued, ignoring his lunge. "He told me a lot of interesting things about your work, about how you turned a blind eye to irregularities in exchange for bonuses." "You?" Hayden gasped with rage. "You talked to Merrick?" "And not just to him," I nodded. "I also sent an anonymous letter to the FDA with specific violations, dates, and lot numbers." There was a deafening silence. Even Elliot, usually indifferent to anything that didn't concern him personally, stared at me wide-eyed. "You—" Hayden slumped in his chair as if his legs weren't holding him up anymore. "You did this? Did you?" "Yes," I straightened. "Yeah." But why? There was genuine incomprehension in his voice. Why would you ruin my career? I wasn't planning on ruining your career, Hayden, I said. I just wanted justice to be done. Like I wanted you to stop thinking of me as a free servant in your house. What the hell was that? Hayden tried to pull himself together. We took you into our family, put a roof over your head. With my money, I clarified. And in return, we got a free nanny, cook, and housekeeper. That's a good deal, isn't it? Grandmother, Macon interjected gently. We didn't think of you that way. Maybe not you, Macon. I softened my tone, looking at my grandson. But your parents certainly saw me as a convenient acquisition. And when I became independent, they started talking about senile dementia. Taryn blushed and lowered her eyes. I'm leaving, I said, getting up from the table. I'm moving out. What? Hayden stared at me. Where? I have my own apartment. I smiled, enjoying his confusion. And a job. I took a job at Burns and Associates 2 weeks ago. A job? Taryn couldn't believe her ears. At your age? At my age, people can still work, I shrugged. Especially if they have professional skills. But what about us? Macon asked, confused. Who's going to cook and... He paused, apparently realizing how that sounded. I smiled. That's right, Macon. Who's going to cook, clean, wash, iron? Who will do all the work I've been doing for free for the last 3 years? I'm afraid you'll have to learn to manage on your own, or hire an au pair, if finances permit. Hayden seemed to be recovering from the shock. You can't just leave, he said threateningly. This house was built with your money. Some of my money, I corrected, and legally it's all yours. I have no claim to it. Nor do I have a claim to the money that's already been spent. Consider it my last gift to you. But you can't live alone, was Hayden's last-ditch attempt at control. You're an old woman, you need care. I laughed genuinely, heartily. Hayden, listen to yourself. I'm 65, I'm in great shape with a clear head and a solid memory. I'm perfectly capable of living on my own, and I intend to do just that. I headed out of the dining room. I turned around at the door. Oh yeah, one more thing. I'm dating a man. His name is Corbin Pennell. He's a former school teacher. He lives in my new house. He's a very intelligent and nice man. I think we're getting serious. Hayden's face contorted with rage and shock. Are you out of your mind? Dating? At your age? What's the big deal? I shrugged. Love is for all ages. Isn't that what they say? You. Hayden gasped in indignation. I'm a happy woman who finally broke free from a toxic relationship, I finished for him. And I'm going to enjoy my freedom. I left the dining room and went up to my room. There was an already packed bag with the last of my belongings waiting for me there. I took it and went downstairs. The family was still sitting at the table in a daze. No one said a word as I walked past the dining room toward the exit. Goodbye, I said as I opened the front door. Don't look for me. And don't call. If I need to contact you, I'll do it myself. I stepped out onto the porch and took a deep breath of the evening air. It smelled of freedom. The door slammed behind me as Hayden jumped out of the house. You're going to regret this, he shouted after me. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't live alone. I turned around and looked at my son, furious, out of control, his face contorted with anger. In that moment, I felt not anger, not triumph, but only a slight sadness. Sadness that the man I'd birthed and raised was capable of such despicable behavior. No, Hayden, I said quietly. I won't regret it. And I won't go back. The thread that held us together is broken. And you know what? I feel more alive than I have in years. I turned and walked down the path without looking back. The cab was already waiting for me on the corner. I'd called it ahead of time, knowing the conversation would be difficult. I got into the car, gave the address of my new apartment, and leaned back in the seat, feeling an invisible weight fall from my shoulders with every meter away from my son's house. The threads were broken. I was free. Mornings in my new apartment began, not with the anxious need to slip silently into the kitchen to make breakfast for everyone, but with a cup of coffee by the window. I sat in a small chair I bought at the thrift store around the corner and watched the sunlight slowly fill the space, my room, my home. It had been a month since I'd left Hayden's house, a month of freedom and discovery. I've been slowly fixing up the apartment, turning the impersonal space into a cozy nest. Nothing expensive or fancy used furniture. Bookshelves Corbin had assembled from simple boards, brightly colored pillows I'd sewn myself, a few paintings from the flea market. But each piece was chosen by me, reflecting my taste, my preferences. I didn't have to ask anyone's permission or consider anyone else's opinions. I took a sip of coffee and looked at my watch. 8:30. I had to be at work in an hour. I wasn't in a hurry. It was a 10-minute walk to Audra's office, one of the advantages of living in a compact Richland neighborhood. The work was satisfying as well as money. My skills as a stenographer were in demand, and my attention to detail and neatness were highly valued at the law firm. At first, I worked 3 days a week, but soon Audra offered to increase my hours. Now I was working 5 days for 4 hours, which gave me a steady income but left plenty of time for my personal life. And I definitely had a personal life. Corbin Pennell, my second-floor neighbor, turned out to be exactly the man I'd been unconsciously looking for all my life. Intelligent, well-read, with a subtle sense of humor and without the condescension toward women that is often found in men of his generation. Our relationship developed unhurriedly and naturally. At first, it was conversations in the yard, then joint walks, dinners in small cafes nearby, exchange of books and opinions. We were not in a hurry to put a name to what was happening between us. It seemed unnecessary at our age. We simply enjoyed each other's company, the comfort and warmth that came from meeting. Corbin never tried to control me or tell me what to do. He respected my independence as much as I respected his. I smiled, remembering our conversation yesterday. We were sitting on a park bench, watching the kids playing on the playground. "You know, Winnie," he said, using a diminutive name that I now liked better than the full name. "I never thought I'd meet the woman who would turn my life around at 70. Turn it around?" I looked at him in surprise. Had I turned anything upside down? "Oh, yes," he smiled. "Before you came along, I was floating along. I lived a quiet, peaceful life with no particular goals or aspirations. And now I wake up thinking I'm going to see you today. Planning where we could go, what we could talk about. I feel alive again, Winnie. And that's wonderful." I didn't know what to say, just squeezed his hand. But I felt warm inside, knowing that I wasn't the only one feeling this way. The phone rang, snapping me out of my memories. I looked at the screen. Hayden's number. Again. He'd called almost every day for the past month. At first the calls were angry, threatening, and accusatory. Then the tone had changed to one of remorse and pity. Lately, it had been direct requests for help. I pressed the reject button. A minute later, the phone beeped, announcing a new message. "Mom, we need to talk, please. The situation is critical. Taryn has filed for divorce. I've lost my job. I need your help." I sighed and put the phone away. I knew from Tegan that things really weren't going well for Hayden. An investigation at Novomed had uncovered serious irregularities, and he'd been dishonorably discharged. Finding a new job in the pharmaceutical industry with such a stain on his record was almost impossible. Taryn, who had always valued stability and status, could not accept the collapse of her husband's career and financial difficulties. She did file for divorce and was about to move with her children to her parents in another state. Part of me felt sympathy for my son. Still, no matter what, he was my child. But another, stronger part of me remembered all the humiliation and neglect I had endured in his home. I remembered how he'd cheated his sister, how he'd used my money, how he'd turned me into a free servant. No, I wasn't going back to that. I wasn't going to become dependent on him again or let him be dependent on me. I sent a short reply. "Hayden, I'm sorry you're in trouble, but I can't help you. Not financially or in any way. Please stop calling." Maybe it was cruel, but sometimes cruelty is necessary to sever unhealthy ties permanently. I finished my coffee and went to get dressed. After work today, Corbin and I planned to visit an exhibit of local artists and then have dinner at a small Italian restaurant that had recently opened nearby. I'd chosen a light lavender-colored dress. Corbin had said it went especially well with my silver hair. I wore modest but elegant earrings, a gift from Tegan for my birthday, which we'd celebrated last week. A little makeup, comfortable shoes, and I was ready for a new day. On my way to work, I met my neighbor, Mrs. Jung, an 80-year-old Korean woman who lives in the apartment across the hall. She was walking her little Pekingese. "Good morning, Winifred," she said with a smile. "You look beautiful today." "Thank you, son," I smiled back. "How are you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing great," she said with a wink. "I saw you and Mr. Pennell in the park yesterday. You make such a handsome couple." I felt a blush come to my cheeks. At my age, such a reaction to a simple compliment. But it was nice to know that others noticed and approved of my relationship with Corbin. "We're just friends, son," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "Sure, sure," she smiled understandingly. "At our age, you can call it whatever you want. The important thing is that you're good together." We said goodbye and I continued on my way. It was going to be a beautiful day, sunny, but not too hot. Perfect for a walk around the exhibition. Work in the office went on as usual, calm and productive. I transcribed audio recordings of court hearings, occasionally exchanging jokes with Audra and other employees. I was valued here not only for my professionalism, but also for my life experience, for the stories I sometimes shared during my lunch breaks. At 2 o'clock, I finished work and went home to change for the exhibition. As I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I saw a familiar figure at the door. Hayden. He stood leaning against the wall with a dull look in his eyes and slumped shoulders. He straightened up at the sight of me. "Mom." His voice sounded hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. Finally, I stopped a few feet away from him, keeping my distance not only physically, but emotionally. "What are you doing here, Hayden? I told you not to come looking for me." "You weren't answering your cell phone." He took a step toward me. "I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about." I kept my voice steady, though my insides clenched from the unwanted encounter. "Please go away." "I can't." He shook his head. "Mom, I'm desperate. Taryn has taken the children and gone to her parents' house. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house for defaulting on the mortgage. I have nothing left." "I'm sorry," I said. And it was true. I was really sorry to see my child like that. "But what do you think I can do to help?" "Money." He said the word with difficulty, as if it hurt him physically. "I need money to keep me going until I find a new job. Not a lot, just—" "No," I interrupted him. "I don't have any money for you, Hayden. Everything I had, I've already given away. For your house, for your kids' education, for your needs. That's all I have." "But you're working," he said, a touch of desperation in his voice. "You must have some kind of salary and a pension." "Barely enough to pay for this apartment and live modestly?" I sighed. "Hayden, you're 50 years old. You're a grown man. Solve your own problems." "How could you?" His face contorted with anger and resentment. "I'm your son. Your only son." "Yes, you are my son," I agreed. "But that doesn't give you the right to use me. Doesn't give you the right to demand sacrifice from me. I've already sacrificed too much." "You—" he stammered, clearly trying to hold back the insults that were coming out of his mouth. "You've changed, Mom. You've become cruel, heartless." "No, Hayden." I shook my head. "I hadn't changed. I just finally learned to respect myself, respect my boundaries, my needs, my wants. What seems like cruelty to you is really just healthy self-respect." At that moment, the door of the neighboring apartment opened and Corbin appeared on the doorstep. He took one look at the situation and, without a word, walked over to me, standing beside me. His presence gave me an extra boost of confidence. "Hayden, this is Corbin Pennell," I introduced him. "Corbin, this is my son Hayden." Corbin nodded, but didn't hold out his hand. Hayden ignored him, continuing to stare at me. "So it's true," he said bitterly. "You're really dating him?" "Yes," I answered simply. "At your age?" There was so much contempt in his voice that I flinched. It's indecent." "Why?" Corbin asked calmly. "Why is it unseemly for two grown free people to enjoy each other's company?" "You—" Hayden clenched his fists. "You took advantage of the situation. You took advantage of her vulnerability." Corbin grinned. "If you know your mother at all, Mr. Crump, you must realize how ridiculous it sounds to suggest that anyone would take advantage of her vulnerability. Winifred is the strongest and most independent woman I've ever met, and I'm happy that she allows me to be close to her." I felt a lump come up in my throat. No one had ever spoken of me with such respect and admiration. Go away, Hayden, I said firmly. Leave and don't come back. I won't give you money. I'm not coming back to your house. I won't be your free servant again. Our paths have parted. You'll regret it, he gritted through his teeth. When you're alone, when that old man finds someone younger. Enough, Corbin stepped forward, his voice steely. I understand you're in a difficult situation, Mr. Crump, but that doesn't give you the right to insult your mother or me. Please leave before I call the police. Hayden hesitated, shifting his gaze from me to Corbin and back again. Finally, he turned and walked toward the stairs. He stopped at the top of the stairs. You'll be sorry, he said over his shoulder and started down. Corbin and I stood in silence until we heard the front door slam downstairs. Only then did I let myself breathe out. Are you okay? Corbin took my hand gently. Yes, I nodded, feeling the shiver slowly subside. Thanks for stepping in. You're welcome, he smiled. Though I have to admit your son scares me a little. There's something unstable. He's always been like that, I sighed. He's just been better at hiding it in the past. It's hard to admit, but my son lacks basic human decency. Corbin put his arm around my shoulders. Don't blame yourself, Winnie. Children grow up the way they do, no matter how hard we try. You did the best you could. I snuggled into him, feeling the tension slowly fade away. You know what the weirdest thing is? I said quietly. I don't feel any guilt or regret at all. I'm just relieved that I'm finally out of it. It's not weird, Corbin stroked my back. It's a healthy reaction to a toxic relationship. You're lucky you found the strength to leave. We entered my apartment, and I immediately felt the comfort of the cozy, familiar space. This was my home, my fortress. No one here could tell me what to do. No one could criticize or humiliate me. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. Corbin sat at the small dining table, watching my movements. Still want to go to the exhibition? He asked. Or would you prefer to stay at home after such a meeting? I hesitated. My first impulse was to refuse, to shut myself in the apartment, to digest what had happened. But then I realized that was exactly what Hayden wanted, to throw me off balance, to make me feel guilty and vulnerable again. No, I said firmly. We're going to the exhibit and dinner. I'm not going to let him ruin our day. Corbin smiled. That's why I admire you, Winnie. Your fortitude is impressive. I smiled back, feeling a warmth spill inside. Maybe it was love, not the violent passion of youth, but a calm, deep sense of mutual respect and support. The exhibition turned out to be exactly what we needed. Bright, life-affirming paintings by local artists, a calm gallery atmosphere, and quiet conversations with Corbin about art and life. By the end of the evening, the incident with Hayden seemed distant and insignificant. Returning home after dinner, I stopped at the doorstep of my apartment. Would you like to come in for a cup of tea? I asked Corbin. I'd love to, he smiled. We sat on the small couch, drinking tea and talking about everything in the world. About books we'd read in our youth. About places we'd like to visit. About dreams that it's not too late to realize. You know, said Corbin, setting aside his empty cup, I've been thinking about going to Europe. I've always wanted to see Rome, Paris, Barcelona. But it's kind of not the same. I looked at him, realizing what he was getting at. Are you suggesting that I come with you? Yes, he nodded. We could go next spring. Nothing luxurious, of course, but quite comfortable. I have savings, and I know you know how to save money, too. It got me thinking. Traveling to Europe had always been a dream of mine, but Roger didn't like long trips, and after his death, I hadn't thought about such possibilities. It sounds wonderful, I said at last, but let's not rush into a decision. We have time to think about it. Of course, Corbin took my hand. There's no rush. We're not young people who need everything here and now. We can afford the luxury of slow decisions. I squeezed his hand, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for having this man in my life. A man who understood me, respected my boundaries, valued my opinion. After Corbin left, I sat at the window for a long time, looking out at Richland at night. The city was falling asleep, the lights in the windows slowly going out. I thought about my life, about the path that had brought me here. All these years I had lived for others, for my husband, for my son, for my grandchildren. I gave them my strength, time, care, money, and asked for nothing in return except basic respect. But even that was too much for Hayden. I was living for myself now, and it wasn't selfishness as my son tried to make it seem. It was self-respect, a realization of my own worth. I deserved a quiet, dignified life. I deserved respect and love. Revenge was never my goal. I didn't want to destroy Hayden's career or his marriage. All I wanted was freedom. Freedom from manipulation, from guilt, from being a free servant. If justice was served and Hayden got what he deserved for his shenanigans at the company, well, that was just a byproduct of my desire for independence. I didn't gloat over his troubles. But I didn't feel pity either. Hayden was a grown man who'd made his choices, and now had to take responsibility for them. Just as I was responsible for my choice in favor of freedom and self-respect. I closed the window and went to my bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day. A day that I would live the way I wanted to live. In my room, in my world, where there is finally room for the real me.